An elderly woman gave her blanket and bread to a strange child. Many years later, sick and with no resources, she trembled at the surprise she found on her doorstep. The autumn sun cast long shadows across Addison Park, its golden rays barely managing to warm the chilly air that heralded the coming winter. Clare Johnson, at 65 years of age and with a life well lived, adjusted her cashmere scarf around her neck and quickened her pace along the path strewn with dry leaves. The crunching sound beneath her feet echoed the passage of time, reminding her of the many autumns she had already witnessed. Her elegant figure, wrapped in a caramel-colored wool coat, contrasted with the earthy tones of the park. Her grey hair, perfectly arranged, framed a face marked by expression lines that spoke of both laughter and past worries. In one hand, Clare held a paper bag, the tempting aroma of freshly baked bread drifting through its edges. In the other, a blue and white plaid wool blanket carefully folded, a relic from happier times. Clare made this walk every day, a routine that brought comfort to her solitary life. Widowed for 5 years, she found peace in these afternoon strolls, watching families and children playing in the park. Today, however, something felt different. The biting wind seemed to carry a silent call, guiding her steps away from her usual path. That was when she heard it, a sound barely perceptible, muffled by the rustling of the leaves. Clare stopped, tilting her head to listen more carefully. There it was again, a faint sob coming from behind an old oak tree. Intrigued and slightly apprehensive, she approached slowly. Huddled at the base of the tree, almost invisible among the gnarled roots and fallen leaves, was a little girl. She could not have been more than 6 years old. Her thin arms were wrapped around her trembling legs in a desperate attempt to protect herself from the cold. Her worn, threadbare dress barely covered her scraped knees, and her tattered shoes scarcely deserved the name. Clare felt her heart tighten. The girl lifted her eyes, large and brown, glistening with tears yet to fall. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. In that gaze, Clare saw fear, hunger, and a loneliness no child should ever know. Without a second thought, Clare knelt beside the girl, ignoring the protest of her aging knees. Moving gently so as not to startle the child, she unfolded the wool blanket. The blue and white fabric, so full of memories, now seemed destined for a greater purpose. "Hello, dear," Clare murmured, her voice as soft as a summer breeze. "It's a bit cold to be out here, don't you think?" The girl did not reply, but her eyes fixed on the blanket with an intensity that spoke volumes. Clare gently draped it over the child's trembling shoulders, feeling the contrast between the soft fabric and the girl's cold skin. "My name is Clare," she continued, keeping her voice low and reassuring. "What's your name, sweetie?" "Sophie," the girl whispered, her voice almost inaudible. Clare smiled, a smile that reached her eyes and seemed to light up her entire face. "Sophie. What a lovely name. It suits you." Slowly, as if she feared the moment might vanish, Clare opened the paper bag. The aroma of fresh bread intensified, and she saw Sophie's eyes grow wide. "You know, Sophie, I bought this bread for my dinner, but I think my eyes were bigger than my stomach. Would you help me eat it?" Sophie's tiny hands hesitated for a moment before reaching for the bread Clare offered. With an encouraging nod, Clare placed the loaf in the girl's hands, watching with a mix of joy and sadness as Sophie took a famished bite. While Sophie ate, Clare noticed details she had missed at first glance. Her tangled hair, her dirty nails, the marks of dried tears on her thin cheeks. Each detail told a story of neglect and hardship that made Clare's heart ache. "Sophie, dear, where are your parents?" Clare asked gently, after the girl finished eating. Sophie lowered her eyes, clutching the blanket more tightly around her. Mom is sick. She sleeps a lot. And Dad left a long time ago." Clare felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. Without thinking, she reached out and gently stroked Sophie's hair. To her surprise, the girl did not pull away. On the contrary, she leaned into the touch like a flower seeking the sun. "It's getting late, Sophie. We need to find your mother. Can you show me where you live?" Sophie nodded timidly, standing up with the blanket still firmly wrapped around her. Clare stood too, offering her hand, After a moment's hesitation, Sophie took it. As they walked together through the park, Clare felt something change within her. The small, trusting hand in hers seemed to anchor something long adrift. Looking at Sophie, wrapped in the blue and white blanket, Clare knew her life would never be the same. The sun was setting when they arrived at a rundown building on the outskirts of the park. Sophie stopped at the entrance, looking at Clare with a mixture of gratitude and sadness. "This is it," she said quietly. Clare knelt again, meeting Sophie's eyes. "Keep the blanket, sweetie. It will keep you warm." Sophie impulsively hugged Clare, a quick, tight embrace that spoke more than 1,000 words. Then, before Clare could react, the girl slipped through the building's door, taking the blanket and a piece of Clare's heart with her. Walking back home, Clare felt both light and heavy. Light, because she knew she had made a difference in someone's life today. Heavy, because she knew she would spend many nights thinking of Sophie, wondering if she was all right, if she was warm, if she was safe. What Clare did not know, as twilight wrapped her in its violet mantle, was that her simple act of kindness had planted a seed that, in the years to come, would grow into a tree of hope and love, with deep roots and branches that reached for the sky. A tree that, one day, would offer shelter and comfort not only to Sophie, but to Clare herself, in a future neither of them could have imagined at that moment. Sophie climbed the stairs of the dilapidated building, her footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The blue and white blanket trailed behind her like a magical cloak in a fairy tale. Reaching the 3rd floor, she stopped in front of a door marked 307, hesitating a moment before turning the rusty knob. The apartment was small and poorly lit, with peeling walls and a damp smell in the air. In the corner, on a thin mattress on the floor, lay a frail figure, Sophie's mother. Her pale face contrasted with the darkness of the room, her sunken eyes opening slowly at the sound of the door. "Sophie, is that you, honey?" Her mother's voice was just a hoarse whisper. "Yes, Mom." "Look what I brought." Sophie ran to her mother's side, proudly unfolding the blanket. "A very kind lady gave it to me in the park, and there's bread too." Sophie's mother touched the blanket with trembling fingers, her eyes filling with tears. "Oh, Sophie, it's lovely, but we shouldn't—" "It's all right, Mom," Sophie interrupted, covering her mother with the blanket. "She said I could keep it. She was so kind." As Sophie excitedly told her mother about her encounter with Clare, her mother listened with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Gratitude for the kindness of a stranger, sorrow for not being able to offer more to her daughter. The apartment they called home was actually a temporary shelter, provided by a local charity. They had moved there 3 months ago, when Sophie's mother's illness prevented her from continuing to work. The thin walls offered no privacy, and the shared bathroom at the end of the hallway was a constant reminder of their precarious situation. That night, Sophie shared the bread with her mother, watching anxiously as she ate slowly, each bite seeming like an effort. When they finished, Sophie helped her mother settle in, carefully covering her with Clare's blanket. "It'll keep you warm, Mum," she whispered, kissing her mother's fevered forehead. After her mother fell asleep, Sophie sat near the window, the faint moonlight illuminating her thoughtful face. Her fingers absently stroked the soft fabric of the blanket, her mind replaying the day's events. Clare's kind face, her gentle hands, the warmth of her embrace. All of this was etched into Sophie's memory. More than the blanket or the bread, it was Clare's selfless kindness that touched the girl's heart most deeply. In the days that followed, the blanket became Sophie's most treasured possession. She washed it carefully in the cracked sink of the communal bathroom, drying it on the narrow window of her apartment. At night, she wrapped herself in it, imagining herself back in that moment at the park. A week after meeting Clare, Sophie was sitting at the wobbly table in the apartment, scribbling on a piece of crumpled paper. Her mother, having a slightly better day, watched with curiosity. "What are you drawing, sweetie?" Sophie looked up, determination shining in her eyes. "I'm not drawing, Mom. I'm writing my future." She turned the paper to reveal words written in the clumsy handwriting of a 6-year-old. "I will become a doctor." Her mother blinked in surprise. "A doctor? Is that what you want to be when you grow up?" Sophie nodded vigorously. Yes, I want to help people like you, Mum, and I want to be kind like Claire. I want to make people feel better, just like she did for me. Sophie's mother felt her heart constrict with a mix of pride and concern. Oh, my love, becoming a doctor is very difficult. It requires a lot of study and— I'll study really hard, Sophie interrupted, her eyes shining with resolve. I'll be the best student in school. I'll read all the books. And one day, I'll help people the way Claire helped me. Seeing the determination on her daughter's face, Sophie's mother could not bring herself to dissuade her. Instead, she reached out and stroked the girl's hair. If that's what you want, my love, then that's what you'll be. You can do anything you set your mind to. That night, Sophie slept wrapped in Claire's blanket, the paper with her declaration of intent carefully folded under her pillow. In her dreams, she saw herself wearing a white coat, a stethoscope draped around her neck, helping sick children and mothers. And in each patient she treated, she saw the reflection of Claire's kindness. In the months that followed, Sophie's determination did not waver. She threw herself into her studies with an intensity that surprised her teachers. In her spare time, she devoured books about the human body and the great doctors of the past. Claire's blanket, now carefully folded and kept in a shoebox under her bed, was her secret talisman, a constant reminder of her goal. The seed of hope, planted by an act of kindness on a cold autumn day, had found fertile soil in Sophie's heart. And though the path before her was long and filled with obstacles, little Sophie was determined to nurture that seed, allowing it to grow and blossom into something extraordinary. Meanwhile, in another part of the city, Claire continued her life, unaware of the profound impact her simple act of kindness had made. The seed she had unknowingly planted was destined to grow and bear fruit that would one day return to bless her in ways she could hardly imagine. Time passed inexorably, transforming little Sophie into a determined young woman. The years flowed like a steady river, each moment shaping her character and strengthening her resolve. At 10 years old, Sophie was a constant presence in the local library. Her fingers reverently skimmed the spines of science books, her eyes shining with each new discovery. The blue and white blanket, now carefully folded in its shoebox, became part of her ritual before every important test. A gentle touch, a silent reminder of a promise made years ago. Her mother, though still fragile, found strength in Sophie's determination. On days when fatigue overwhelmed her, the sound of Sophie reciting the bones of the human body was her balm, a living testament that her sacrifices were not in vain. As Sophie grew, Claire Johnson continued her life elsewhere in the city, unaware of the profound impact her kindness had triggered. Her days were filled with routine activities, volunteering at the local shelter, afternoon tea with friends, occasional trips to visit distant relatives. Sometimes, during quiet nights, she caught herself thinking of that little girl in the park, hoping she was well but warm and safe. Little did she know that brief encounter had ignited a flame now burning brightly. At 14, Sophie faced her first great loss. Her mother, after years of struggle, succumbed to the illness consuming her. The funeral was simple, attended by only a few people, but Sophie remained standing, her eyes dry, not from lack of grief, but from unshakable resolve. That night, wrapped in Claire's blanket, she renewed her vow, not just for herself now, but in her mother's memory. The foster system placed her with an adoptive family. They were kind, but distant, unable to fully understand the intensity of Sophie's focus, but she did not need understanding, only opportunity, and that they provided. By 16, Sophie was the top student in her class. Sleepless nights spent studying by the light of a cheap lamp paid off. Her name was at the top of every honor roll and academic competition. Teachers spoke of her in reverent tones, predicting a brilliant future. But to Sophie, this was only the beginning. The blanket, now faded by time but no less precious, was her amulet in moments of doubt. When exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, when the voices of uncertainty whispered that perhaps her dream was too big, Sophie held it close. She closed her eyes and remembered the park, the warm bread, Claire's gentle eyes, and she found the strength to go on. Every obstacle became a stepping stone toward success. When her adoptive family moved to a neighborhood with lower quality schools, Sophie convinced the principal to let her continue at her old school, even though it meant waking up 2 hours earlier and taking 3 buses. When she had no money for the required books, she spent nights copying entire pages by hand at the library. Her final year of high school was a marathon of studying, college applications, and a frenetic search for scholarships. Sophie knew her only chance of attending medical school was a full scholarship. Every form she filled out, every essay she wrote, was a silent promise to the blanket in her shoebox. Finally, the day arrived. Sophie sat at the kitchen table, a pile of envelopes before her, admission letters from several universities, each promising a future, a chance to make her dream a reality. But one envelope in particular made her heart race. With trembling fingers, she opened it. "Dear Miss Sophie Martin, it is with great pleasure that we inform you of your acceptance into the medical school at Oakbridge University." The words danced before her eyes, blurred by the tears she finally allowed to fall. They were not just tears of joy, but also of relief, gratitude for a journey that began with a single act of kindness and now led her to new horizons. The accompanying scholarship was a miracle in itself, covering not only tuition, but housing and books. It was everything Sophie could have hoped for, and more. Years of hard work, sleepless nights, and unwavering determination had culminated in this moment. That night, alone in her room, Sophie unfolded the old blue and white blanket. Her hands gently caressed the worn fabric, each thread a memory, each fold a lesson. She wrapped it around her shoulders, just as Clare had done so many years ago. "I did it, Mom," she whispered into the silent room. "I did it, Clare." The road ahead would still be long and challenging. Medical school would test her limits, challenge her determination in ways she could scarcely imagine. But at that moment, enveloped in the blanket that symbolized both her past and her future, Sophie felt invincible. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of hope, 2 women in different parts of the city prepared for sleep. Clare in her comfortable home, content with another day of small kindnesses, and Sophie in her modest room, her heart full of dreams on the verge of coming true. Separated by distance and time, they were united by an act of kindness that had planted a seed of hope, a seed that years later was about to blossom into something extraordinary. The future awaited, bright and full of promise, and Sophie was ready to embrace it with all the strength of her resolve. The journey that began with a blanket and a piece of bread was far from over. In fact, it was only just beginning, and Sophie, guided and inspired by Clare's blanket, was prepared to face each new challenge, determined to one day repay the kindness that had changed her life. The auditorium buzzed with pride and anticipation as Sophie Martin's name echoed through the speakers. At 24 years old, she crossed the stage with steady steps, her pristine white coat contrasting with her navy blue graduation gown. As she received her medical degree, Sophie felt the weight of all those years of dedication and sacrifice culminating in that moment. With top honors and glowing praise from her professors, Sophie was not just another graduate. She was a promise, a beacon of hope for medicine. Her eyes shone with determination and gratitude as she accepted the congratulations of colleagues and mentors. After the ceremony, alone in her dorm room, Sophie opened the battered shoebox that had accompanied her for 18 years. The blue and white blanket, now faded with time, still carried the fragrance of memories and dreams. She draped it over her shoulders, as she had done countless times during nights of study and moments of doubt. "We did it, Mom," Sophie whispered, her fingers tracing the familiar patterns of the fabric. "And thank you, Clare, wherever you are." Weeks after graduation, Sophie began her residency at Central Hospital, a renowned institution known for excellence and innovation. The pace was frenetic, the shifts exhausting, but Sophie embraced every challenge with the same fervor that had driven her through her years of study. Her fellow residents soon noticed something special about Sophie. It was not just her impeccable clinical skills or her encyclopedic knowledge, it was the way she connected with patients, the kindness in her eyes, the reassuring touch of her hands. To Sophie, each patient was more than a medical case. They were people with stories, fears, and hopes. One night, during a particularly hectic shift in the emergency department, Sophie treated an elderly lady who had fallen at home. While carefully examining the patient, Sophie noticed the frightened, vulnerable look in the woman's eyes. "Don't worry," Sophie said softly, holding the patient's hand. "I'm here to take care of you. We'll get through this together." Relief washed over the woman's face, and Sophie felt a wave of emotion. For a moment, she saw her own mother's face, Claire's face, everyone who needed a touch of kindness in dark moments. Sophie's talent and compassion did not go unnoticed. 6 months into her residency, she was chosen to lead a pilot project focusing on humanized geriatric care. It was a rare opportunity for a resident so young, but Sophie embraced the challenge enthusiastically. Her project revolutionized how the hospital approached elder care. Sophie implemented training programs for the staff, emphasizing not just medical skills, but also empathy and communication. She created welcoming spaces in the geriatric wards, bringing color and comfort to once sterile environments. One day, while presenting the results of her project to the hospital board, Sophie surprised everyone by bringing in an unusual item, a worn blue and white blanket. "This blanket," she explained, her voice laden with emotion, "was given to me when I was a child with nothing. It not only kept me warm but planted in me the seed of compassion that guides my medical practice today. Every patient we treat deserves to feel like this, warm, safe, and valued." Silence filled the room. The board members, usually impassive, seemed moved by Sophie's sincerity and passion. Her project was not only approved for expansion, but also became a model for other hospitals in the region. Despite her growing success, Sophie never forgot her roots. She continued living in a modest apartment, donating much of her salary to charities that supported vulnerable children. On Sundays, when she was not on call, she volunteered at a free clinic in her old neighborhood. In her hospital locker, alongside medical textbooks and pristine white coats, Sophie kept the shoebox with Claire's blanket. On particularly difficult days, when she lost a patient or faced a complicated diagnosis, she locked herself away for a few minutes, holding the blanket to her chest, renewing her strength and purpose. 2 years into her residency, Sophie was named Resident of the Year, recognized not just for her medical skill but for her dedication to transforming the hospital's culture. At the award ceremony, before an audience of colleagues and mentors, Sophie gave a heartfelt speech. "Medicine isn't just about curing disease," she said, her voice steady and passionate. "It's about caring for people. Every patient who comes through our doors carries not only symptoms but hopes, fears, and stories. Our responsibility goes beyond prescribing medication. We must prescribe compassion, empathy, and dignity." The audience rose to their feet in applause, and Sophie felt a mix of pride and humility. Her path had not been easy, but every obstacle, every sleepless night, every sacrifice had been worth it. That night, back in her apartment, Sophie unfolded the old blue and white blanket. Sitting on her small balcony, looking out at the city lights, she reflected on her journey, from a shivering girl in a park to a respected doctor. Each step had been guided by that act of kindness so many years before. "One day," Sophie promised herself, stroking the worn fabric, "I will find you, Claire. I will thank you and show you how your kindness changed not just my life, but the lives of many others through me." The blanket, a silent witness to her rise, lay over her shoulders like a mantle of responsibility and purpose. Sophie knew her journey was far from over. With every patient she treated and every life she touched, she continued to honor her mother's memory and Claire's legacy of kindness. The night wore on, and Sophie, wrapped in her blanket of memories, looked toward the future with renewed determination. The path ahead still held challenges and discoveries, but she was ready, fortified by her roots and propelled by her mission to heal and care. Sophie's office was lit by the soft glow of late afternoon. She was finishing her notes after a long day of patient consultations when her eyes fell on a framed photo on her desk, an image of the park where, so many years ago, her life had been changed by a simple act of kindness. At 28 years old, Sophie Martin was a respected doctor, known for her clinical skill and unparalleled compassion. Her Humanized care program had expanded to several hospitals in the region, transforming countless patients' lives. Yet despite all her success, there was a void Sophie could not fill, the longing to find Clare, the woman who had planted the seed of her future on that cold day in the park. With a determined sigh, Sophie picked up the phone and dialed a number she had kept for weeks. "Smith Investigations Agency, how can I help you?" came a deep voice on the other end of the line. "Good afternoon. This is Dr. Sophie Martin. I'd like to schedule a meeting with Mr. Smith to discuss a missing person case." 2 days later, Sophie sat in the modest office of Andrew Smith, a private investigator with decades of experience. The middle-aged man, grey-haired and sharp-eyed, listened attentively as Sophie recounted her story. "So, Dr. Martin, you want to find this woman, Clare, based only on a memory from 22 years ago?" Smith asked, raising his eyebrows slightly. Sophie nodded, her fingers unconsciously stroking the piece of blanket she always carried in her pocket. "I know it sounds impossible, Mr. Smith, but I have to try. This woman changed my life with a simple act of kindness." "I need to thank her, show her the impact she made." Smith scratched his chin, thoughtful. "It won't be easy, Doctor. We don't have much to go on, no last name, no precise address, but," he smiled slightly, "I've worked with less. Let's see what we can find." In the weeks that followed, Sophie found herself torn between her hospital routine and the anxious wait for news from Smith. Every call, every email made her heart skip a beat, hoping it was the news she'd been waiting for. A month passed with no significant progress. Smith had combed through records of residents near the park from that time, checked volunteer lists at local charities, and even investigated knitting clubs in hopes of finding someone who remembered a woman named Clare who had donated a blanket. Frustration began to set in. Sophie spent her free nights scouring old city photo archives, clinging to the faint hope of spotting a familiar face in some long-forgotten image. 3 months into the search, Smith summoned Sophie for an update at his office. His tired face did not bear good news. "I'm sorry, Dr. Martin," he began, his voice heavy. "We've exhausted all possible leads. Without more information, I'm afraid we've hit a dead end." Sophie felt disappointment weigh on her chest. She pulled the piece of the blanket from her pocket, her fingers tracing the familiar pattern. "I can't give up, Mr. Smith. This woman, she's not just a memory to me. She's the reason I'm here doing what I do." Smith noted the determination in Sophie's eyes, impressed by her persistence. "Look, normally I'd say it's time to close the case, but there's something about your story. Let's try one more thing. What about a campaign on social media? Sometimes the internet can work miracles." With renewed hope, Sophie worked with Smith to create a post detailing her story and her search for Clare. The message spread quickly, shared by friends, colleagues, and even Sophie's patients. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. With each new notification, Sophie's heart raced, only to be followed by the familiar wave of disappointment. Many women named Clare got in touch, but none was the person Sophie sought. 6 months into the search, Sophie was exhausted. The stress of looking was starting to affect her work, and she caught herself wondering whether she should continue. One night, after a particularly difficult shift at the hospital, Sophie sat in her apartment, the old blue and white blanket in her lap. "Maybe it's time to let go," she whispered to herself, silent tears rolling down her cheeks. Maybe what matters isn't finding her, but honoring what she did. Just then her phone rang. It was Smith. "Dr. Martin, we have a promising lead." An elderly lady reached out. "She's not Clare, but she says she remembers a woman who matches your description. Apparently, they volunteered together about 20 years ago." Sophie's heart pounded. "And where is this woman now?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. "That's the problem, Doctor. The contact says Clare moved away from the city years ago. She doesn't know where." Sophie felt a mix of hope and frustration. It was the most concrete lead they had so far, but it still seemed like another dead end. "What do we do now, Mr. Smith?" "Well, Doctor, it gives us a new path to follow. We can check relocation records, look into other cities. It'll take time, but it's something. Sophie took a deep breath, feeling a surge of renewed determination. Then that's what we'll do. No matter how long it takes, I'm going to find her. As she hung up, Sophie looked at the blanket in her lap. Every thread, every fold told a story of kindness, hope, and perseverance. She knew the search would be long and might prove fruitless, but something inside her refused to give up. I'll find you, Claire, Sophie promised out loud. Even if it's the last thing I do, I'll show you what your act of kindness meant. I'll show you the doctor I became, the lives I've touched, all thanks to you. With renewed energy, Sophie began planning the next step of her search. The journey was far from over, but she was determined to follow it to the end, guided by the memory of a blue and white blanket and the woman who had changed her life with a simple act of compassion. Sophie's heart pounded erratically as she stared at the email on her screen. After nearly a year of relentless searching, there was finally a light at the end of the tunnel. Andrew Smith, the private investigator, had achieved what seemed impossible. The current address of Claire Davis, 237 Acacia Street, apartment 3B, Sophie murmured, her fingers tracing the letters on the screen as if to confirm their reality. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone to call Smith. Mr. Smith, is it really her? Are you sure? The investigator's deep voice sounded confident on the other end of the line. Dr. Martin, we've checked and rechecked. All the details match. Age, years, volunteer history, even a mention of a special blanket in an old journal we managed to find. It's undoubtedly her. Sophie felt a surge of emotions, joy, nervousness, gratitude. After so many months and so many false hopes, she had finally found Claire. In the days that followed, Sophie found herself in a whirlwind of preparations. She took a week off from the hospital, something she had never done before. Her apartment became a controlled chaos of papers, photographs, and memories. At the center of it all was the blue and white blanket, carefully washed and restored. Sophie spent hours looking at it, recalling every moment since that cold day in the park. Each thread seemed to tell a story, each fold a chapter of her life. Finally, after days of reflection and countless drafts, Sophie finished writing her letter to Claire. It was anonymous, detailing how a simple act of kindness had changed a small child's life, transforming her into a doctor dedicated to spreading the same compassion she had once received. On the morning of the big day, Sophie prepared the package with almost reverential care. The blanket, precisely folded, was placed in an elegant box. On top, she set the sealed letter and a single white rose, a symbol of gratitude. Cradling the precious parcel, Sophie took a taxi to Acacia Street. The ride seemed both endless and too quick. Each stoplight, each turn brought her closer to the moment she had imagined for so many years. Arriving at the address, Sophie felt her heart skip a beat. The building was modest but well kept, with colorful flowers adorning the windows. For a moment, she hesitated. What if Claire did not remember? What if the gesture did not mean the same to her as it did to Sophie? Taking a deep breath, Sophie gathered her courage and entered the building. She climbed the stairs slowly, her footsteps echoing in the silent hallway. At last, she stood before the door labeled 3B. Sophie raised her hand to knock, but something stopped her. In a sudden impulse, she decided to remain anonymous, at least for now. Carefully, she placed the package on the floor, right in front of the door. Her fingers brushed the box one last time before stepping away. With her heart racing, Sophie hid around the corner of the hallway, waiting. The minutes dragged by like hours. Finally, she heard footsteps approaching from the other side of the door. The door opened slowly, revealing a gray-haired, kindly-faced woman. Claire, now 70 years old, looked puzzled as she glanced down the corridor before noticing the package at her feet. Sophie watched, holding her breath, as Claire bent to pick up the box. Confusion on her face gave way to curiosity as she carried the parcel inside. Overcome by an irresistible impulse, Sophie tiptoed closer to the slightly ajar door, peeking into the apartment. She saw Claire settle into a comfortable armchair, placing the package on her lap. Gently, Claire opened the box, her eyes widening at the sight of its contents. Her hands trembled slightly as she touched the blue and white blanket. For a moment she froze, as though trying to process what she was seeing. "It can't be," Clare murmured, her voice choked with emotion. Tears streamed silently down Sophie's cheeks as she watched Clare slowly unfold the blanket. The older woman held it against her chest, closing her eyes as if embracing a long-lost memory. When Clare finally opened the letter, Sophie had to restrain herself from rushing into the apartment. She watched the emotions pass over Clare's face: surprise, joy, profound emotion. Tears began falling from the older woman's eyes, quietly landing on the blanket in her lap. "Oh my God," Clare whispered, her voice trembling. The little girl from the park. After all these years, Sophie felt her heart fill with an indescribable joy. Clare remembered. The moment that had defined Sophie's life also had left an indelible mark on Clare. For several minutes, Sophie stood there, watching Clare reread the letter multiple times, her hands gently stroking the blanket. She saw Clare rise slowly, going to a shelf and taking out what looked like an old photo album. Realizing she was witnessing something deeply personal, Sophie finally stepped away from the door. Her heart felt light, filled with a peace she had not realized she was searching for. Clare not only remembered, but the gesture clearly meant as much to her as it did to Sophie. Descending the stairs, Sophie felt transformed. The months of searching, the nights of doubt, all had been worth it for this moment. She had closed a circle, repaying the kindness she had received so long ago. Walking through the sunlit street, Sophie smiled to herself. She knew this was not an end, but a new beginning. One day she would return. She would introduce herself, share her story in person, hug the woman who had changed her life with a single compassionate act. But for now, she would let Clare absorb the surprise, relive the memory. Sophie had planted a seed of joy and gratitude, just as Clare had done so many years before. Now it was time for that seed to bloom. With a heart filled and a smile on her face, Sophie went on her way, eager for the day she could finally look Clare in the eyes and say, "Thank you for changing my life." Clare Davis sat in her favorite armchair, the mysterious package still in her lap. Her hands, marked by time yet still graceful, trembled slightly as they touched the blue and white blanket. The fabric, though visibly worn, still carried a familiarity that made her heart ache. "After all these years," she murmured to herself, tears welling in her eyes as she stared at the pattern she knew so well. Memories washed over her like a gentle yet powerful wave. Clare closed her eyes, letting herself be carried back to that cold day in the city park, more than 2 decades ago. She could almost feel the biting wind, hear the rustling of dry leaves underfoot, and then, like a ray of sunshine through the clouds, the memory of the girl, small, fragile, shivering in the cold. Large, frightened eyes that lit up with a spark of hope when Clare approached, the impulsive gesture of giving away her favorite blanket, the loaf of bread she had just bought. Back then, it seemed so simple, so natural. Clare never imagined that moment would be etched into her memory so clearly, or that it would return to touch her again after so many years. Carefully, Clare fully unfolded the blanket, letting it drape gently over her legs. Each fold, each thread, seemed to tell a story. She noticed small patches here and there, signs that the blanket had been well loved and cared for over the years. Her gaze fell on the letter that accompanied the package. With trembling hands, Clare reread each carefully written word. "Dear Clare, you probably don't remember me, but many years ago, on a cold autumn day, you changed my life with a simple act of kindness. I was just a little girl, shivering in a park, and you gave me your blanket and a piece of bread. That gesture may have seemed small to you, but to me it was the beginning of everything. Your kindness planted a seed in my heart, a seed of hope and determination that grew and flourished over the years. Today, I am a doctor. I devote my life to caring for others, spreading the same compassion you showed me that day. Every patient I treat, every life I touch carries a bit of the kindness you taught me. The blanket you gave me has been my talisman, my source of strength during difficult times. Now, I return it to you, along with my eternal gratitude. You may not have realized it at the time, but your act of kindness created ripples that continue to expand to this day. Thank you for showing me the power of compassion. Thank you for changing my life. With infinite gratitude, the girl from the park. Claire let her tears flow freely as she finished reading the letter for the third time. Her mind spun, trying to process the magnitude of what lay before her. "A doctor," she whispered, a tremulous smile forming on her lips. That little girl became a doctor. The pride and joy Claire felt in that moment were almost tangible. She rose slowly, the blanket still in her arms, and walked to the window. The world outside seemed different now, brighter, filled with new possibilities. But as the initial surge of happiness subsided, a new emotion took hold: curiosity. Who was this woman the little girl had become? How had she found Claire after so many years? And why the anonymity? Claire turned to her bookshelf, taking out an old photo album. She flipped through the yellowed pages until she found the section dedicated to her volunteer work. There, among photos of community soup kitchens and fundraising drives, was a picture of the park. Claire could not see the girl in the photo, but the memory of their meeting felt more vivid than ever. In the days that followed, Claire found herself consumed by the mystery of her anonymous benefactor. She re-examined every detail of the package and letter, looking for clues. She asked her neighbors if they had seen anyone leaving the package, but no one had noticed anything unusual. Though fruitless, the search rekindled something in Claire she had not felt in years, a sense of purpose and anticipation. Each day brought the possibility of a new discovery, another step closer to solving the puzzle. Claire began leaving the house more often, walking around the neighborhood with keen eyes, hoping to glimpse a face that might belong to the girl from the park. She returned to volunteer at the local shelter, wondering if her mysterious benefactor might appear there. One afternoon, sitting on her favorite bench in the park, the same park where it all began, Claire had an epiphany. Perhaps the real gift was not uncovering the doctor's identity, but the journey itself. The mystery had brought new light into her life, rekindling a spark of hope and purpose she hadn't realized had dimmed. With that realization, Claire felt a wave of gratitude and peace wash over her. She looked around the park, observing children playing, couples walking hand in hand, elderly folks feeding the pigeons. In every face, in every interaction, she saw the potential for small acts of kindness that could change lives. That night, back in her apartment, Claire picked up a sheet of paper and began to write, "Dear girl from the park, though I do not know your name or face, you have brought an unexpected light into my life. Your gratitude and your success have filled me with a joy I cannot put into words. So I confess I spent days trying to discover your identity, eager to see the wonderful woman you've become. But I've realized the true gift is knowing that a small gesture from so many years ago blossomed into something so beautiful and meaningful. You've given me back not just a blanket, but also hope and purpose. Your letter reminded me of our power to impact each other's lives, often without even realizing it. Wherever you are, know that I am immensely proud of you. Keep spreading kindness and compassion, and know that, thanks to you, I will do the same with renewed vigor. With all my affection and gratitude, Claire." Claire carefully folded the letter and placed it alongside the blanket. She did not know if she would ever have the chance to deliver it, but the act of writing it solidified her renewed resolve. The mystery of the anonymous doctor had become more than just a search for answers. It was a reminder of the lasting impact of kindness and the interconnectedness of all lives. For Claire, it was a call to continue making a difference, one day at a time, one gesture at a time. With a serene smile, Claire gazed at the starry night through her window. The future, once predictable and sometimes lonely, now seemed brimming with possibilities. And somewhere out there, she knew, was a doctor whose life she had touched, an invisible but powerful bond that transcended time and circumstances. The mystery remained, but Claire discovered the uncertainty held its own beauty, a promise that life still had wonderful surprises in store for her. The months that followed the arrival of the mysterious package brought a new vitality to Claire's life. The blanket and the anonymous doctor's letter became her most cherished treasures, a constant source of inspiration and comfort. Yet, like the seasons that change inexorably, Claire's life was about to face transformations of its own, some far less welcome. The first blow came quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Clare noticed she was having trouble remembering small things, where she had left her keys, a neighbor's name, appointments she was sure she had noted down. Initially, she dismissed these occurrences as mere distractions, attributing them to age and stress. Meanwhile, miles away, Sophie continued her meteoric rise at Central Hospital. Her days were filled with challenging surgeries, patient consultations, and cutting-edge research. At night, in her rare, quiet moments, her thoughts often wandered to Clare, wondering how she was, if she was well cared for, if she had family nearby. Back at Clare's apartment, her difficulties began to mount. One day, she received a letter stating that her pension would be reduced due to budget cuts. The blow was harsh, forcing her to make difficult choices. Clare started economizing in small ways, buying cheaper brands at the grocery store, turning the heater off earlier at night, canceling her favorite magazine subscription. The changes in her routine were subtle at first, but soon became more pronounced. Clare began avoiding leaving home as often, fearing she might get lost on streets she once knew well. She found herself staring at familiar objects in her apartment, struggling to remember their names or uses. One morning, Clare woke up in a panic, momentarily unable to recall where she was. The fear she felt in that moment was overwhelming. When reality finally settled in, she sat on her bed, trembling, clutching the blue and white blanket to her chest like a shield. "It can't be," she whispered to herself, silent tears rolling down her lined cheeks. "Please, not this." In the days that followed, Clare wrestled internally with the growing suspicion that something was seriously wrong. She knew the signs. She had seen friends and loved ones go through this. Alzheimer's. The word hovered in her mind like a looming shadow. Determined to maintain her independence, Clare devised strategies for coping with her memory lapses. She covered her apartment with colorful sticky notes, reminding her of daily tasks and important information. She set alarms on her phone for medications and appointments. And above all, she struggled to keep up appearances, smiling at neighbors and assuring everyone she was just a bit distracted lately. Meanwhile, Sophie faced her own challenges at the hospital. One particularly difficult case involving an elderly patient with advanced Alzheimer's left her emotionally shaken. Caring for him, Sophie could not help but think of Clare, wondering if she was safe, if she had someone to look out for her. One evening, after a long shift, Sophie picked up her phone, fingers hovering over the number she had for Clare. She had come close to calling so many times, nearly revealing her identity. But something always held her back at the last moment. Fear of breaking the magic, uncertainty about how she would be received. With a sigh, she put the phone away again, promising herself that someday she would find the courage. Months passed, and Clare's situation deteriorated quickly. Her memory lapses became more frequent and severe. There were days she forgot to eat, others when she spent hours searching for items that were right in front of her. Bills began to pile up, some forgotten, others simply impossible to pay with her dwindling resources. A particularly frightening incident occurred when Clare went out to shop and could not find her way back home. She wandered the streets for hours, disoriented and afraid, until a kind stranger helped her return to her apartment. The experience shook her deeply, forcing her to confront the gravity of her situation. Clare knew she needed help, but pride and fear kept her from asking. She dreaded losing her independence, being forced to leave her home, her belongings, her memories. Above all, she feared disappointing the anonymous doctor who had expressed such gratitude and admiration for her. One morning, Clare awoke feeling particularly confused and disoriented. She could barely recall her own name, let alone her daily routine. In a moment of clarity, she realized she could no longer postpone the inevitable. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and dialed emergency services. "Please," she whispered to the operator, her voice trembling with fear and shame. "I need help. I think I'm losing my mind." As the ambulance headed to Clare's apartment, Sophie was beginning another day at Central Hospital, completely unaware of the drama unfolding. She reviewed charts, preparing for her daily consultations, Not knowing that soon her world and Claire's would collide in a way neither could have foreseen, Claire was rushed to the ER, confused and scared. She clung tightly to a bag containing her most precious possessions, some documents, a change of clothes, and, of course, the carefully folded blue and white blanket, along with the anonymous doctor's letter. In the hospital, doctors ran a series of tests and examinations. The diagnosis, though expected, was still devastating. Moderate Alzheimer's, complicated by malnutrition and stress. The medical team recommended immediate admission for stabilization and further evaluation. While Claire was settled into a hospital bed, Sophie was upstairs conducting her rounds, unaware that the woman who had transformed her life was now under the same roof, desperately in need of help. Fate, however, has a peculiar way of uniting paths that are meant to cross. As night fell over the hospital, events aligned for a meeting that would forever change both Claire's and Sophie's lives. Claire, lying in her hospital bed, gazed out the window, her thoughts a jumbled mix of past memories and present fears. She clutched the blue and white blanket to her chest as if it were a protective talisman. Sophie, finishing her shift, decided to make one last round before heading home. Her path would inevitably lead her to the ward where Claire was hospitalized. The stage was set for a reunion neither woman could have anticipated, a moment that would test the strength of a bond forged decades before, one that had endured time, distance, and would now face its greatest challenge, the relentless fog of forgetting. Central Hospital hummed with the usual nighttime bustle. Nurses hurried through corridors, monitors beeped in steady rhythms, and the low murmur of conversations filled the air. Amid this organized chaos, Dr. Sophie Martin walked toward the geriatric ward for her final round of the day. Tired after a long shift, Sophie longed to go home. Her thoughts had already drifted to the comfort of her apartment, a hot cup of tea, and perhaps another look at that old shoebox holding her most precious memories. Reaching the nurse's station, Sophie took the clipboard with the list of new patients, her eyes scanning the names quickly. Suddenly, her heart stopped. There, on the third line, was a name she knew all too well, Clare Davis. "It can't be," Sophie murmured, her heart pounding. "Claire, my Claire." Hands trembling slightly, Sophie read the patient chart. Female, 72, admitted with suspected moderate Alzheimer's, found disoriented at home, unable to care for herself. A whirlwind of emotions consumed Sophie. Shock, worry, a twinge of guilt for not having revealed herself sooner, and beneath it all, a fierce determination to help the woman who had changed her life so many years ago. Taking a deep breath to steady herself, Sophie walked toward Claire's room. She paused at the door, observing the fragile figure in the bed. Claire looked smaller, more vulnerable than in Sophie's memories. Her once elegant grey hair was disheveled and dull. Her eyes, once so full of kindness and vivacity, roamed the room with a confused expression. Sophie entered silently, her heart aching at the sight of Claire clutching a familiar blue and white blanket. "Ms. Davis," she called gently, "I'm Dr. Martin. How are you feeling?" Claire turned towards Sophie, her eyes taking a moment to focus. "Doctor, I don't really know where I am. This isn't my room, is it?" Sophie gently sat on the edge of the bed. "You're in the hospital, Ms. Davis. You had a little trouble at home, and they brought you here so we could take care of you." Claire frowned, clearly trying to process the information. "Hospital? But I don't recall coming here. And my cat? Who will feed my cat?" Sophie's heart broke, realizing Claire had no cat. It was just another confusion caused by the disease. "Don't worry about the cat, Miss Davis. I'm sure it's being well cared for. Right now, let's focus on you, all right?" While Sophie performed a basic exam, her mind raced. Part of her wanted to reveal everything immediately, to tell Claire who she was, to thank her once more for the act of kindness that had changed her life. But the rational part, the trained physician, knew it could be too overwhelming for Claire in her current state. "That's a lovely blanket," Sophie commented, gesturing to the blanket Claire still held tightly. For a moment, Claire's eyes lit up. "Oh yes, it's very special to me. You see, a long time ago I gave it to a little girl in a park. She was so cold, Her voice trailed off, the memory slipping away like sand through her fingers. Sophie felt tears forming but held them back. "That was very kind of you, Miss Davis. I'm sure it meant a lot to that girl." Claire offered a vague smile, already lost in other thoughts. "Doctor, when can I go home? I have to feed my cat, you know." Sophie gently held Claire's hand. "Let's take care of you first, Miss Davis. I promise I'll do everything I can to help." Leaving the room a few minutes later, Sophie leaned against the corridor wall, feeling the full weight of the situation. Claire, her savior, her inspiration, now desperately needed help, and Sophie was in a position to provide it. That night, long after her shift had ended, Sophie stayed at the hospital, reviewing every detail of Claire's case. She consulted specialists in Alzheimer's, researched the latest treatments, and began devising a comprehensive care plan. In the days that followed, Sophie rearranged her schedule to spend as much time as possible with Claire. She personally supervised each aspect of her treatment, from medication to occupational therapy. To other doctors and nurses, she explained her special interest as part of her research into humanized geriatric care. With each visit, Sophie hoped for a spark of recognition in Claire's eyes, a sign that the special connection they shared was still there, buried beneath the fog of Alzheimer's. But Claire remained unaware of Sophie's true identity, at times even forgetting she was a doctor. One afternoon, as Sophie helped Claire eat, she noticed silent tears rolling down the older woman's face. "What's wrong, Mrs. Davis? Are you in any pain?" Sophie asked, concerned. Claire shook her head slowly. "No pain. It's just that sometimes I feel like I'm disappearing. There are so many things I can't remember, so many important people I no longer recognize, and I'm scared I'll one day forget who I am." Sophie felt her heart break. Gently, she took Claire's hand. "Ms. Davis, listen to me. You are so much more than your memories. You are every act of kindness you've ever shown, every life you've touched, and I promise, as long as I'm here, I'll never let you forget how special and important you are." Claire looked at Sophie, a small smile forming on her lips. "You're very kind, Doctor. You remind me of someone important. Remember who?" Sophie swallowed the lump in her throat. "That's all right, Miss Davis. What matters is that we're here now, and I'm going to take care of you." That night, alone in her office, Sophie stared at the framed photo of the park where she had met Claire. She touched the glass softly, renewed determination shining in her eyes. "I'll bring you back, Claire," she whispered to the image. "Somehow, I'll help you find your way back to your memories, to yourself. It's my turn to be your blanket, to offer warmth and comfort when you need it most." With that silent promise, Sophie returned to her work, determined to do everything in her power to guide Claire through the haze of forgetting, led by the invisible but powerful bond that united them. The insistent beep of the heart monitor filled Claire's room, a constant reminder of her fragile condition. Sophie hovered over a stack of test results, her face a mask of concentration and concern. Each new result seemed to bring worse news, painting an increasingly dire picture of Claire's health. "Dr. Martin?" came the gentle voice of a nurse, interrupting her thoughts. "The results of Miss Davis's latest cognitive test are in." Sophie took the envelope with mixed anxiety and dread. Reading the report, she felt her heart sink. Claire's Alzheimer's was advancing faster than expected, compounded by undetected heart and kidney issues. "Thank you, Marie," Sophie said to the nurse, her voice trembling slightly. "Please schedule a consult with Dr. Thompson in cardiology and Dr. Carter in nephrology. We need a multidisciplinary approach." Alone again, Sophie allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. She closed her eyes, feeling the weight of responsibility and emotion pressing down. Claire was not just another patient. She was the reason Sophie stood there, the reason she had become a doctor. A soft stirring from the bed caught her attention. Claire was waking, her eyes blinking slowly as she tried to focus on her surroundings. "Good morning, Miss Davis," Sophie said gently, moving closer to the bed. "How are you feeling today?" Claire turned to Sophie, her eyes surprisingly clear. "Oh, Doctor, good morning. You know, I had such a vivid dream last night." Sophie sat on the edge of the bed, her interest piqued. These moments of lucidity were precious. "Would you like to tell me about it?" Clare smiled, a glimmer of her former self illuminating her face. "I dreamed of a park. It was autumn, the leaves were falling. There was a little girl there, so small and so cold. I gave her my favorite blanket and a piece of bread. Funny, isn't it, how our dreams can seem so real?" Sophie's heart raced. It was not a dream. It was a memory of the day that had changed both their lives forever. She fought the urge to reveal everything right then. "That does sound like a beautiful dream, Miss Davis," Sophie managed to say, her voice filled with emotion. "You must have been a very kind person." Clare frowned, as if trying to hold on to a fleeting thought. I think I was. Or at least I tried to be. You know, Doctor, sometimes I feel like there are so many things I've forgotten, so many stories I can't tell anymore. It's as if parts of me are disappearing." Sophie took Clare's hand, feeling the frailty of the bones beneath thin skin. "Miss Davis, you're still here. All those stories, all those memories, they're part of who you are, even if you can't recall them right now." They sat in silence for a moment, each lost in her own thoughts. Sophie struggled inwardly with the desire to reveal herself, to tell Clare who she really was, but fear of causing confusion or distress held her back. The days passed, and Clare's condition fluctuated like a leaf in the wind. There were times of crystal-clear clarity when she spoke of her past with a vividness that made Sophie's heart soar. Clare recounted stories of her work as a teacher, of trips she had taken, of loves lost and found. "You know, Doctor," Clare said one afternoon, as Sophie checked her vitals, "I never had children. Sometimes I wonder what it would have been like, to have someone to care for, to love unconditionally." Sophie felt a lump form in her throat. "I'm sure you would have been a wonderful mother, Miss Davis." Clare smiled sadly. "Perhaps, but in a way, all the children who passed through my classroom were a little bit mine. I hope I made some difference in their lives." "I'm certain you did," Sophie whispered, fighting back tears. "More than you can imagine." But there were also dark days when Clare barely recognized where she was or who Sophie was. During those times, she became agitated, sometimes even aggressive, demanding to go home or calling out for people long gone. One particularly difficult night, Clare had a severe episode of confusion. She tried to leave her bed, insisting she had to go to the park to find the girl. "Please," she begged Sophie, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "I have to find her. She was so cold. I promised I'd be back." Sophie, heartbroken, gently held Clare, trying to calm her down. "It's all right, Miss Davis. The girl is safe." "She's all right." "How do you know?" Clare asked, her voice trembling. "How can you be sure?" In that moment, Sophie nearly revealed everything. The words hovered on the tip of her tongue. "Because I am her. I'm the girl from the park. I'm here, safe, thanks to you." But fear of overwhelming Clare's already fragile mind held her back. After Clare finally settled down and fell asleep, Sophie retreated to her office, exhausted and emotionally drained. She picked up the phone, dialing a familiar number. "Dr. Thompson, this is Sophie Martin. I need your opinion on a case. It's complicated." In the days that followed, Sophie worked tirelessly, consulting specialists, adjusting medications, trying every therapy that might help stabilize Clare. But despite her best efforts, Clare's condition continued to deteriorate. One morning, Sophie entered Clare's room to find her sitting on the bed, gazing out the window with a distant expression. "Good morning, Ms. Davis," Sophie said gently. Clare turned slowly, her eyes taking a moment to focus. "Good morning. Who are you?" Sophie felt as though she had been punched in the gut. It was the first time Clare had failed to recognize her entirely. Swallowing the lump in her throat, she reintroduced herself, patiently explaining where Clare was and why. That night, alone in her office, Sophie stared at the photo of the park on her desk. The decision she had been postponing for weeks weighed on her like a ton of bricks. "What should I do?" she whispered to the picture. "Tell her the truth and risk confusing her even more, or stay silent and miss the chance to truly connect with her?" The beep of her pager interrupted her thoughts. It was from Clare's room. With her heart pounding, Sophie ran down the halls, knowing that whatever she decided, time was running out. Clare needed her now more than ever, and Sophie was determined to be there for her in one way or another. The silence of the night at Central Hospital was suddenly broken by the piercing sound of an alarm. Sophie, who had dozed off in her office after hours of research, woke with a start. Her pager vibrated urgently. It was Clare's room. Heart in her throat, Sophie sprinted through the corridors, her footsteps echoing on the linoleum floor. Approaching Clare's room, she heard shouts and the sound of objects falling. Sophie burst into the room to find chaos. Clare was on her feet, in a state of extreme agitation, her grey hair disheveled, eyes wide with fear and confusion. She had knocked over the bedside table and was trying to rip out her IV line. "I have to go, let me go," Clare screamed, her voice raw with desperation. "She's waiting for me. The girl from the park. She needs me." Sophie moved closer cautiously, hands extended in a placating gesture. "Clare, it's me, Dr. Martin. It's all right. You're safe here." But Clare did not seem to hear her. She continued to thrash, her frantic movements endangering herself further. With a swift motion, Sophie managed to reach Clare, wrapping her in an embrace that was both firm and gentle. "Shh, it's all right," she murmured, feeling Clare's frail body tremble against her own. "I'm here. You're safe." Slowly, Clare's agitation subsided. Her screams turned to muffled sobs, and she clung to Sophie as though she were her only anchor in a turbulent sea. "Please," Clare whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "My bag. I need my bag." Sophie looked around and saw Clare's bag on the floor. Still holding Clare with one arm, she stretched to pick it up. "It's here, Clare. What do you need?" With trembling hands, Clare opened the bag and pulled out a small, worn leather journal. "Here, it's all here." Curious, Sophie helped Clare back to the bed and sat beside her. Clare flipped through the journal's pages with uncertain fingers until she found a specific entry. "Read it," she asked Sophie, her gaze suddenly clear and focused. "Please read it to me." Sophie carefully took the journal and began to read aloud. October 10th, 1995. Today marks 1 year since that day in the park. 1 year since I gave my blanket and my bread to that small-eyed, frightened girl. I can't stop thinking about her, wondering if she's all right, if she's warm and safe. I went back to the park today, hoping to see her again, but she wasn't there. I promised myself I won't give up. One day, somehow, I'll find her again. Sophie felt her voice falter, tears welling in her eyes. She turned a few pages and continued. May 15th, 2000. 5 years have passed, and still no sign of the girl from the park. I started volunteering in children's shelters, always looking for her. Sometimes I wonder if she remembers me, if that small act of kindness meant as much to her as it did to me. No matter how long it takes, I'll keep looking. Sophie's hands trembled as she turned the pages, reading excerpts from entries over the years. Each spoke of Clare's tireless search, her unwavering hope of one day reuniting with the little girl from the park. Finally, Sophie reached the last entry, dated just a few weeks earlier, September 3rd, 2023. My memory isn't what it used to be. There are days I barely remember my own name, but I never forget her, the girl from the park. Even if I never find her again, I hope that, wherever she is, she knows that moment changed my life as much as, I hope, it changed hers. If I could say anything to her now, it would be, you gave me a purpose. You showed me the true meaning of compassion, and for that I am forever grateful. Sophie lowered the journal, tears coursing freely down her face. She looked at Clare and saw that the older woman was watching her with surprising intensity. Clare, Sophie began, her voice shaking with emotion. I am her. I'm the little girl from the park. For a moment the room was utterly silent. Then slowly recognition lit Clare's eyes. Sophie, she whispered, reaching a trembling hand to touch Sophie's face. My little Sophie. Sophie nodded, unable to speak through her tears. She pressed Clare's hand against her cheek, feeling the warmth and love emanating from that simple touch. You became a doctor, Clare said, a radiant smile lighting her face. "Oh, my dear, I knew you would do wonderful things." They embraced, the years of searching, hope and gratitude culminating in that perfect moment of reconnection. "I never forgot," Sophie whispered. "Your kindness changed my life." "You gave me hope when I needed it most," Claire smiled through her tears. "And you gave me purpose, a reason to keep going even when everything seemed dark." Sophie held Claire's hands in hers, looking into the eyes of the woman who had once been her savior and was now her patient. "Claire, I promise I will take care of you. I'll stay by your side, no matter what happens. We're in this together now." Claire nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of joy and peace. "My Sophie, my girl from the park, I've finally found you." As night wore on, Sophie remained by Claire's side, their hands intertwined, their stories finally complete. The hospital room, once cold and impersonal, now seemed to glow with the warmth of a long-awaited reunion, the start of a new chapter in their intertwined lives. The morning sun filtered through the hospital room curtains, softly illuminating the faces of Sophie and Clare. After the emotional night of revelations and reconnection, both had fallen asleep, their hands still entwined. Sophie was the first to awaken, blinking as the memories of the previous night flooded back. Glancing at Clare, still peacefully asleep and looking more serene than Sophie had ever seen her, Sophie felt a decision crystallize in her heart. She could not leave Clare alone again. With renewed determination, Sophie began to plan. In the weeks that followed, Sophie worked tirelessly to make it happen. She spoke with the hospital administration, arranged for a partial leave of absence, and initiated the legal process to become Clare's guardian. Her once solitary apartment now transformed to accommodate her new companion. Sophie hired a team to install grab bars in the bathroom, a ramp at the entrance, and safety alarms throughout. The guest bedroom was converted into a welcoming space for Clare, complete with a comfortable hospital bed and decor reminiscent of Clare's old apartment. At last, the day of Clare's discharge arrived. Sophie felt a blend of excitement and nervousness as she helped Clare into the car. "Are you ready to go home?" Sophie asked gently. Clare looked at her with a trembling smile. "Home, with you. That sounds wonderful, dear." The first day at home was an emotional roller coaster. Clare swung between moments of clarity, expressing her gratitude and affection, and periods of confusion, repeatedly asking where she was and why she could not return to her old apartment. Though exhausted, Sophie remained patient and loving. "We're home, Clare," she would gently repeat. "This is our home now. We're together." That night, after settling Clare into bed, Sophie collapsed onto the sofa, feeling the weight of the day. She briefly questioned whether she had made the right decision, whether she could adequately care for Clare while maintaining her career. But then she remembered the look of peace on Clare's face when she finally settled into her new bed, and she knew she had done the right thing. Days turned into weeks, and slowly a new routine formed. Sophie rose early to help Clare with her morning bath and breakfast before leaving for her reduced shifts at the hospital. A caregiver stayed with Clare during the day, and Sophie returned at night, eager to spend time with her new housemate. There were challenges, of course, nights when Clare awoke disoriented, calling out for people from her past, days when she refused to eat or take her medications, moments when she did not recognize Sophie, treating her as a stranger in her own home. But there were also moments of pure joy and deep connection, like the afternoon Sophie returned home to find Clare flipping through an old photo album, her eyes bright with recognition. "Sophie, come see," Clare called excitedly. "I found a picture of the park." "Look how small you were." Sophie sat next to Clare, her heart overflowing with emotion at the old photo. Though it did not actually show them together, it was just a generic image of a park in autumn. But the fact that Clare made that connection, remembered, meant the world. "Do you remember that day, Clare?" Sophie asked softly. Clare nodded, her eyes distant but filled with affection. "I remember the cold, the wind, and I remember seeing you, so small and scared. In that moment, I knew I had to help. I never imagined that little act of kindness would bring me so much." Sophie embraced Clare, feeling the love and gratitude that bound them. "You changed my life that day, Clare. And you continue to change it every day." As weeks turned into months, Sophie discovered a new perspective on family and care. She had always been devoted to her patients, but now she experienced an entirely different level of devotion and love. Clare was not just a patient or even a friend. She was family in the truest sense of the word. Sophie learned to find joy in small moments. Clare's smile when tasting her favorite dish, the peace on her face when Sophie read to her before bed, the excitement in her voice when recalling a fragment of their shared past. One night, after a particularly good day, Clare held Sophie's hand and spoke with surprising clarity. "Sophie, my dear, I want you to know how much this means to me. You haven't just saved me from loneliness and forgetting. You've given me a family, a daughter I never thought I'd have." Sophie felt hot tears roll down her cheeks. "Oh, Clare," she replied, her voice trembling with emotion, "you've given me so much more than that. You showed me the true meaning of compassion, of unconditional love. You are my family, my inspiration, my home." That night, as Sophie watched Clare sleep peacefully, she reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought them there, from a chance meeting in a cold park to a bond that transcended time and circumstance. Sophie realized that by caring for Clare, she was not merely repaying an old favor. She was living out the legacy of kindness and compassion Clare had begun so many years ago. In doing so, they had both found something precious, a chosen family, united by bonds stronger than blood or memory. With a gentle smile, Sophie adjusted the blanket over Clare, the same blue and white blanket that had started it all, and whispered, "Good night, Clare. Thank you for being my family." And so, in a cozy apartment in the city, two souls' fate had entwined found peace, love, and a sense of belonging neither had ever imagined possible. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the apartment as the first rays of morning sun crept through the curtains. Sophie moved quietly around the kitchen, preparing breakfast as she did every morning for the past year. What had once been strange and challenging now flowed with familiar comfort. "Good morning, dear." Clare's soft voice came from the kitchen doorway. Sophie turned, her face lighting up at the sight of Clare standing there, leaning on her cane, already dressed, her eyes shining with the promise of a good day. "Good morning, Clare. Did you sleep well?" Sophie asked, helping Clare to the table. "Oh yes," Clare replied, her eyes roaming appreciatively around the kitchen. "You know, sometimes I still wake up surprised to be here. It's so nice and so full of love." Sophie felt her heart warm at Clare's words. The last 12 months had been a journey of ups and downs, but moments like these made it all worthwhile. After breakfast, they headed to what had once been Sophie's office, now dubbed Clare's Corner. The space was cozy, painted in gentle tones, and filled with carefully selected photos that told the story of their intertwined lives. At the center, displayed with reverence, hung the original blue and white blanket framed like a work of art. Clare settled into her favorite armchair, her fingers idly stroking the chair's armrest. "Sophie, dear, could you read a bit from the journal for me?" Sophie retrieved the worn diary from the shelf, now a cherished ritual. She opened to a random entry and began to read, April 15th, 2000. "Today, I saw a young woman helping an elderly lady cross the street. For a moment, I thought I saw my little girl from the park, now grown up. It wasn't her, of course, but it made me smile to think that maybe, wherever she is, she's also spreading kindness in the world." Clare closed her eyes, a serene smile on her face. "And you were, weren't you? Spreading kindness. My little doctor." Sophie felt tears welling up. "All thanks to you, Clare. You planted that seed." The hours passed peacefully, filled with gentle conversation, reading, and comfortable silences. In the afternoon, they decided to enjoy the mild weather in the small condominium garden. Sitting on a bench wrapped in the original blanket Sophie had carefully preserved, they watched the flowers sway in the gentle breeze. Clare, in a moment of crystal clarity, turned to Sophie. "You know, my dear," she began, her voice firm and full of emotion, "when I think of how my life could have been, alone, lost in the shadows of forgetting, and then look at where I am now, with you. It's as if you brought the sun back into my world." Sophie embraced Clare, feeling the weight of those words. "Oh, Clare," she whispered, "you have no idea how much light you brought to my life. That day in the park, it was only the beginning." As the sun began to set, painting the sky with golden and pink hues, Sophie reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led them there, a simple act of kindness, a momentary connection between a lonely woman and a frightened child, blossoming into something so profound and beautiful. "Claire," Sophie said softly, "do you remember when you asked if I'd fulfilled my dreams?" Claire nodded, her attentive eyes fixed on Sophie. "Well, I've accomplished more than I ever imagined," Sophie continued. "Not just becoming a doctor. I found a family. I found you." Claire smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "My Sophie, my daughter at heart." In that moment, wrapped in the blanket that started it all, Sophie felt an overwhelming certainty take hold in her heart. This was her family, her home, her purpose. "Claire," she said, inspiration striking clearly, "I want to use our story to help others. I'm thinking of creating a program at the hospital to connect lonely seniors with volunteers, to build more families like ours." Claire's eyes lit up with pride and joy. "Oh, Sophie, that would be wonderful. Think of how many lives you could touch, how many hearts you could warm." As they walked back to the apartment, the blanket enveloping them like an embrace, Sophie pondered the power of small acts of kindness, how one seemingly insignificant gesture could create waves of love and compassion extending over a lifetime. That night, after tucking Claire into bed, Sophie stood at the door watching her chosen family member rest. The blue and white blanket, now gently faded with time, yet still laden with significance, was neatly folded at the foot of the bed. Sophie smiled, a deep peace settling in her heart. The journey that began in a cold park so many years ago continued, not just for the two of them, but with the potential to touch countless other lives. As she softly closed the door, Sophie made a silent promise to continue Claire's legacy of kindness, to offer warmth and hope as the blanket had done so many years before. Because in the end, Sophie realized, it is these small acts of love that weave the true fabric of our lives, connecting us in a tapestry of compassion and care that endures through time. And so, with her heart full of gratitude and renewed purpose, Sophie prepared for another day, a day brimming with possibilities, love, and the ongoing promise of making a difference, one simple act of kindness at a time.